Any further wants to respond to this, Svante?
Yeah, my role is, as from what I've heard in the US, that there is actually federal authorities. They actually have to buy a certain amount of their supplies from small companies. I think it's about 10%. So they can't do this only large-scale buys, and that these 10% will help the small companies to actually get the first customers, get experience from doing business, and so on. And as to the last question, how we avoid mistakes, I think actually that government has to be the early adopters. They will have to face some mistakes, but we have to be more forgiving when that happens. We have to realize that it's not a failure to actually try 10 different technologies and see that one is better than the other 9. That's a good way of practice. And no government authority should be hanged, or how you say it, because you should actually try to encourage them to take some risk and try different things. That's from my perspective anyway.
Any last questions, perhaps, or should we, before we wrap it up? Okay, thank you. We have been into quite a large subject, of course, and there's much more to discuss in these areas related to Cleantech and the negotiations. Stefan, who opened up, who have a very good insight into the negotiations, could you share some of your reflections from this discussion, of something you might want to bring with you when you follow the rest of the negotiations up to Copenhagen?
There's an awful lot of good input from this debate, and I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna write down these minutes from this and send it to Bangkok and my colleagues working with negotiations and trying to influence decisions makers. Not tonight, because I'm going to party, but tomorrow. I promise. But it's very, very good input. What I would like to say, just a few remarks on the practice for the entrepreneur and the issues like little support in seed funding. That is not what is being discussed in Copenhagen. This is something where there needs to be a continued push on domestic industrial policy to actually see Cleantech as a big future industry for domestic policies. It will not come into negotiations. Demand-side policies, existing solutions, not talked about in negotiations as much as I think it should be, and that has come out here. There's a lot of talk about big land on the moon projects when we talk about specific technology issues, like for example, the favorite subjects when it comes to technology is how to capture carbon from coal-fired power plants and store it, and the public funding that needs to go into those kind of very, very big projects. So that's very interesting. I think the infrastructure lock-in and the smart grid that we're talking about, and that's really interesting because the infrastructure is very, very important to change and go into a smarter system in order to get the dynamic effects to reduce emissions. And then I think it was said as well, the entrepreneurs need to be out there now and find new global partnerships, because there is an awful lot going to happen in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years in this field, and it needs to be, entrepreneurs need to be out there. And much more aggression as well. We need to decouple growth from emissions. I mean, that's the challenge of this generation, to decouple growth from emissions. And then, if I may ask a very direct question back on that one, there's a lot of talk about this only thing that's going to be a shared vision between all countries, all 192 countries, about being 2 degrees. We are suggesting a carbon budget, so basically saying, by the end of the 21st century, no more emissions, which is equivalent to reaching a 2-degree target. What would you, as market players, say would be the most clear signal for you to be out there and act on? Do you think that the 2-degree target is concrete enough for policymakers and industry to understand how big this mental shift needs to be, and the mental capacity to do this transformative change that Christian talked about? Do you think the world community in Copenhagen, or whenever there's a major decision taken over the next couple of years, is 2 degrees concrete enough for that communication to communicate to the market?
Or should it be 0?
Or should it be 0 or 75% renewable energy by 2050? Something more like...
I mean, I think you have to pick a number somewhere to drive the equation, right? So it's a multivariate equation. Pick one, and everything else, you know, basically follows, because you know how long carbon stays in the atmosphere. You know what the pace of the sinks is if we don't cut them all down, and you can sort of work backwards, and that will eventually drive what the cap looks like, right? So, yeah, I mean, you ought to start from what is the ecological and human tolerance, essentially, and we've sort of decided, I guess, or some people have decided that 2 degrees is the right number. You know, you can then work backwards and figure out what that implies in terms of how much, you know, greenhouse gas you can emit. So, I mean, it's a stake in the ground, you know, it's a direction.
I would say transparency, that would be my first. And when we in society has developed in the way that customers and voters are the same, that you mean you vote, you buy, and you're sort of social citizen, that goes together, then we might make those tremendous changes of a 0. For our report, when our 14 companies started the report, the first report we published, we had a big 0 on it. But after four years of work on energy efficiency in building, we realized under present economic conditions and the political landscape, we cannot reach the 0. So we couldn't get out the last report with a big 0 here, because people would not take us seriously. So that's why we went into transformative change. Okay, thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you very much, dear panel members, for sharing your views on this topic. Ann-Sophie here will provide you with a small gift, and we like to leave you with a few words from our International Secretary General about how you can view the climate change both as a big threat, but also, of course, an opportunity to prosperity for the globe and for the clean tech industry. But if we want that, if we want to be able to do this that we've been talking about here, why don't you go out there and raise your voice and make sure that we get this climate deal in Copenhagen in December? You can also play a difference in that. And find out more at our websites. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much at the panel. Okay.